If there's a video game franchise that's gotten a lot of flack over the years, it's Sega's Sonic the Hedgehog. Once a chili dog scarfing contender with Nintendo's Mario, Sonic has found himself starring in a handful of mediocre games and many calling for his retirement. However, in recent years, Sonic seemed to step up his game. Games like Sonic Colors, Generations, and even Unleashed use 3D speed-focused stages and 2D stages inspired by the Genesis classic games. While the general consensus is that Colors and Generations games are pretty good, Unleashed's nighttime stages with the beat-em-up element drew many criticisms. It was a game that tried to bring the series both back to its roots while also trying something new, and people didn't seem to like that. That doesn't make it a terrible game, but it was different than what people wanted in a Sonic the Hedgehog title. Sega, in my mind, fixed this with Sonic Colors, which was an incredibly refreshing game on the Wii. Great 2D stages, pretty solid and fun 3D stages, an overall gorgeous presentation, and a decent story. Generations would follow with a time travel plot, a lot of challenges to play, and great replay value. However, these games were fairly easy to play through and could be beaten pretty quickly without too much worry on lives and such. These games are extremely fun and impressive, but I was starting to get sick of the blurring speed of Generations. Sonic felt slippery and I never felt that I had total control over him. It was getting kind of stale, dashing around at the speed of sound without any real regard for my surroundings. Again, don't get me wrong, these games are pretty good. I even liked Unleashed a good bit, but I was at the point where I wanted to see something new done with Sonic. And then I heard about Sonic Lost World for the Nintendo Wii U, the latest entry in the series, also available for the 3DS. Lost World steps about as far away from Generations, Colors, and Unleashed that it can, at least in terms of the 3D stages, and does something completely different. That's something Sonic always gets criticized for. Every time the guy does something different, it seems, he gets flack. Where his long-standing rival Mario gets praise in doing things differently. This is because Mario's been able to pull off different things when Sonic seems to have a hard time translating into new mechanics. But does Sonic Lost World, with its leap away from Generations formula, work? Well, let's talk about that. Sonic Lost World is fundamentally different than previous games in the series. That must be made abundantly clear. From the visuals to the gameplay mechanics, Sonic Lost World is a different Sonic game than we've had in recent years, but it still feels like an appropriate Sonic title. From a visual standpoint, the game is strikingly good looking. Bright colors, vibrant backgrounds, well-designed enemies and surroundings, everything on screen just pops out at you in a good way. Sonic Lost World's colorful approach to level design recalls the series' glory days from the Genesis, though the grass and checkerboard pattern of Windy Hill zones seem to find themselves in other zones quite often. Thankfully, that Green Hill Zone inspired design looks great. The plot, like most Sonic games at least these days, is simple, loose, paper thin, and I love it. Remember in the first games how Sonic would open a capsule at the end of the zones to free his captured animal buddies? Dr. Robotnik was using those animals to power his badniks. Well, Robotnik, or Eggman, or whatever his name is back and doing the same thing as the game opens, with Sonic and Tails trying to rescue a capsule from the mad scientist and his two robot sidekicks, Orbot and Cubot. After failing to get the capsule, Sonic and Tails crash land on the Lost Hex, which is never actually really explained in the game. In fact, it's only mentioned 2 or 3 times in the overall story. I really have no idea what the Lost Hex is here for, other than to be the setting of the game. The first level of the game is Sonic finding and opening that dropped capsule, and we eventually learn that there's capsules all over the place. The Good Doctor's overall goal is, well, world domination. After all, what other goal could there be? He's employed the help of the Zeti, 6 powerful demon-like creatures who he controls with a weird shell. The Zeti, known as the Deadly Six, make it their goal to destroy Sonic for Eggman as he builds a machine to suck energy from the world. Sonic eventually kicks the shell away and the Zeti turn Eggman's badniks against him and Sonic, prompting them to team up to stop the Zeti from draining all the energy in the world with Eggman's machine. What follows are some pretty odd interactions with the Good Doctor.
I'll supply the brains. You will supply the brawn I need to get past the Zeti.
Oh, and you're asking so nicely.
Good one, buddy.
Thanks.
Man up, Tails. I don't like working with my most hated enemies any more than you do. I'll get fat from eating your black hearts, you Eggman wannabes!
Whoa! Can't figure you out. 1 second you're contemplating genocide, and the next you're saving one of your worst enemies.
I'm a complicated guy.
The Zeddy themselves are fun characters, but they're flatter than a steamrolled pancake. You got your crazy one.
Are you disrespecting me?
Maybe.
I'm gonna mess you up!
Your fat glutton.
Don't talk with your mouth full.
You're right. Hey, I forgot the mustard!
Your saucy lady.
Well, what if I told you that you were the only one I trusted to be fast enough, smart enough, and pretty enough
Go on.
to beat the blue nuisance?
Well, I'd say you got the right girl for the job.
The depressed emo, who's my personal favorite.
I gotta go tell the others the bad news. Giving bad news is actually the one thing I enjoy. I'll deal with you later, loser.
The wise master.
Hey! It'll be good to stretch these old bones.
And their powerful leader.
We don't care about your disappointment, Master.
The Zeddy don't bring much to the literary world of characters and are certainly anything but deep, but they do help add a sense of charm to the game where Sonic has a little bit of interaction with the villains other than Eggman himself. I enjoy this because there's a little bit of build-up to the confrontation with the game's antagonists, but more on their confrontations later. Sonic's control and really the game's overall design is much different than you might expect. Sonic's been slowed down from the blazing blue blur of the last games to a still decently fast Hedgehog in Lost World. He's not a fundamentally slow character now, as some people might have you believe, but his speed is a reflection of the space he is given. Holding the ZR button allows Sonic to run, unlike the other games where Sonic moves and dashes with just a push of the D-pad or the directional stick. This gives, in my opinion, far more control over Sonic, as it helps the player slow him down when needed or speed him up when necessary. The ability to slow down is necessary as some areas warrant some careful consideration of your movements, such as narrow walkways or tricky platforming sections. Running can also change how Sonic works in certain environments. An example are the ice levels, where running will allow Sonic to skate, turning his normal jump into a twirly move worthy of his spot in the Sochi Olympics. Running is also how players utilize the new parkour mechanics, such as running along the edges of walls. The parkour elements of Lost World allow us to traverse areas in a different way than before. Sonic can leap from wall to wall to go upwards and reach a platform he couldn't jump to, or leap over obstacles by jumping from wall to wall horizontally. It takes a few tries to get used to this parkour stuff, but really all you need to do is be running and jump at a wall with a decent bit of speed and the game will handle the rest. Speaking of that, the game doesn't hold your hand in terms of tutorials or prompts on controls. The game will occasionally tell you to poke the gamepad for a moment to read something about either Sonic's moves or a hint about proceeding or scoring more points. This pauses the game, which can be a touch annoying as it breaks the action, but I prefer the game being paused while trying to read the gamepad over the game running while I'm trying to read it. I like the parkour. The player actually having real control of Sonic running along walls is something I've wanted to do since I was a kid. And once you get it right, it's not often you mess up the execution of the parkour moves. And actually, there's not a whole lot of instances where you're forced to use the parkour. If you want to find all the hidden red rings, save the animals from their capsules, or just go exploring in each level, you'll use the mechanic quite a bit. But if you're just interested in finishing the stages, you'll be using the wall jump in the 2D stages far more than you'll use the other moves in the 3D areas. And that's not a bad thing. A big plus for the Genesis era games was the ability to kind of choose how you would tackle the levels with different paths and ways to reach the goal. The same is true in some areas for how you proceed in some sections of Lost World. You don't get too many alternating paths, but you do get different ways you can choose how you'd like to proceed. Would you rather tackle an army of badniks or jump over pits? Leap along the wall or deal with traps and obstacles? The player is given a choice. Lost World is a different beast than Generations and Colors, and needs to be played as such. Drawing comparisons to that game's speed and control versus Lost World's, I feel may be a limited argument. This is a new game trying out a new element of gameplay. This is an attempt to evolve the series from what I felt was blindly running toward the goal in some cases, to giving the player options in completing the level or finding its secrets, while also giving the player far more control over the character than we've seen before. Granted, you could do that before in some of the other games, but in Lost World I feel there's greater control and greater options for the player. With the new control and the levels to complement it, comes a little bit of a higher difficulty level. I actually got my first game over in a Sonic game in years with Lost World, and I loved it. I should preface all of this by saying I am still a proponent of having lives in video games and not doling out extra lives too easily. This motivates the player into taking risks and tempting them with rewards for their skill, whereas in my opinion, other games just respawn your character and let you tackle something infinitely, which to me just gets kind of old after a while. But that's me, and that's not something a lot of people agree with me on. I'm definitely in the minority on that one. You can get infinite continues in Lost World, so it's not like the game punishes you too severely for getting a game over anyway. Homing attacks and similar moves return from the past games, and I think they are vastly improved. Sonic can lock onto groups of enemies and bounce through them to get higher points, freeing the animals inside, or kick enemies or their weapons into other badniks. And the badniks are the classic robots from the game's past, and behave just like they did in games previous. I love that about this game. There's good fun in separating a caterpillar piece by piece, or escaping from a grabber's suicidal explosion, or even dodging Soul's fires. Hell, even the turtleoids make an appearance in these sky levels. And you know what? None of these enemies felt poorly implemented or cheap in their design, and not all of them just go down with a simple homing attack. Because the game never comes right out and tells you how to beat some of these enemies, you'll find yourself experimenting with kicks versus homing attacks or the direction you attack a badnik. I simply love that about this game. It actually makes the badniks feel like they're worth something, unlike how they felt in the past couple games. I should emphasize that I do not feel Lost World was made difficult because of the control. The levels are designed to be decently challenging. I never felt that poor controls or poor design of the levels were the reason for my performance in the game. I think the levels are pretty well designed and offer a ton of variety in their appearance, the exception being that Windy Hill style look. Typically in the second and fourth levels of each area, Sonic fights one of the Zeti, and during those levels, the Zeti taunt or express worry or joy that the Hedgehog is headed their way.
All I want to do is chill, but here comes that fashion disaster Hedgehog. Those shoes are atrocious, and the white gloves are ridiculously retro.
This gives a little bit more personality to the eventual encounter with the Deadly Six, something that I really enjoy, until you realize that these are some of the easiest boss battles in the series. This is my biggest complaint about the game. While the bosses are mechanically fine, they are far too easy. Thankfully, you fight each Zeti a number of times, but with a few exceptions, they never felt like a real, surmountable threat to the Hedgehog. And that is rather disappointing considering the build-up during these stages and the cutscenes. However, I still enjoy that build-up to confrontation element in the game. I just wish the damn boss fights were as challenging as the levels themselves. Sonic Lost World is a different kind of animal than its predecessors. From a far more colorful presentation to a completely new way to control Sonic, Sega has crafted a game that's drumming up a little bit of debate, with some calling it average, mediocre, or even a painful experience. Lost World isn't broken, and I don't feel it to be a poorly designed or cheap game in any way. I think I have to stress this. It is different. Whether or not players like that is another thing. But for me, I feel Sonic benefits from a change like this. Sonic Lost World is about using your skills to your advantage to traverse dangerous areas in a new, refreshing way. I know I'm not going to sway too many people on this game, I feel. But if you're on the fence about Lost World, I do encourage you to check out what I feel is the most refreshing game of the series in recent years. My only tip is to take the time to play the game by its rules and not the rules of previous games. Yes, Sonic is a little bit slower, but given his available playing area and the scale of the levels, he still feels like the blue blur a lot of us have grown up with. The soundtrack, the colorful levels, badniks, and the stage design all feel very at home in Sonic Lost World, and that's something I simply enjoy a lot, and I do encourage you to give the game an honest shot. There should be demos available on the Nintendo eShop so you can make a fair assessment of the game for yourself. See how Sonic plays for yourself, and then decide if you want to shell out the cash for the game. I don't think you'd be making a mistake though. I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with Sonic Lost World. It's a little bit short, it's not exactly the hardest game in the world, but it's a refreshing update in the series, and I think it's worth your time. Hey, thanks for checking out this review of Sonic Lost World. I do expect some will disagree with my thoughts on this game, and that's perfectly fine. We all have different expectations when coming into a game as different from its predecessors as Sonic Lost World. If you do feel differently, go ahead and sound off in the comment section below. And if you hate Google Plus and can't comment, then hit me up on my Facebook page. And while you're here, why not check out some of my other videos I've done recently, or subscribe for more reviews delivered right into your feed. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you again real soon.